What's up guys, it's River and today we're looking at the Sony a5100. This is a really interesting camera because it has the form factor of a compact camera, but has the features and benefits of a Sony mirrorless. Plus, it's one of the best deals on the market right now for vloggers, content creators, just a casual person who wants to start photography. But this camera does have a few limitations. However, I've got a solution to all of them. So let's do a deep dive, figure out exactly what this camera does, exactly who it's for, and if it's right for you. Plus, before you ask, it has a flip screen. So let's jump right into the specs. This camera has an awesome 24 megapixel sensor, which is very standard in the industry and is good enough for most people. It does 6 frames per second, which isn't the fastest, but again, middle of the road, it's very fine. This camera has a raw buffer of 21 images or 72 JPEGs, which basically means you can shoot up to 21 raw images or 72 JPEGs before the camera needs a breather. And given those specs, this camera is more than good enough for vacation photos, going to a music festival with your friends, or just shooting your dog in the park. And if you're a young artist or photographer, this camera will do you just fine if you're shooting fashion, portraits, anything that does not have too much movement or where you need to get a lot of fast moving action shots. Although if you are someone that's looking to do some really intense action shots, I recommend bumping up to the a6000. That camera does 11 frames per second. The raw buffer itself stays relatively the same, but you're going to get 11 frames per second as opposed to the 6 frames per second for only about $150 more. Overall, the photo quality in this camera is great. The images are very vibrant and very sharp, so if you want really striking images right out of the camera, you will not be disappointed. And when it comes to taking photos, one of the best features on this camera is the flip-up screen. You can easily put this camera on a selfie stick and get some really nice wide selfies. Also, if you're a vlogger, this is ideal because you can easily see yourself, and because the camera is so lightweight, it makes it a really convenient vlogging camera. And another feature that I really like about this camera, when the selfie mirror is up, you can just hold down the button and it'll go into selfie timer mode and you get a pretty cool selfie out of it. Next, let's talk about video. This camera does 24 all the way up to 60 frames per second in full HD. Sadly, no 4K, but I think that's okay because it's only a $450 camera. The video itself is super solid. Sony cameras are known for having really good video, and this camera does not disappoint. So if you're looking for something just to capture your daily life adventures, capture those special moments in your life, or vlog, you will not be disappointed. This is a super solid camera at an amazing price. One thing to note, this is not a low light camera by any stretch of the imagination. It's about as good as a Canon camera in low light, and Canon cameras are generally get noisy after 3200. In this camera, I would really push past 3200 as well. Sony cameras are generally known for being low light monsters. Sadly, this is one of their older models and it does not have those same low light capabilities. Also, I want to quickly touch upon colors and filters. So this is not a cinema camera and has 0 color profiles, but one thing that I do appreciate about this camera is that it has different color modes like portrait, landscape, sunset, which give you really interesting color profiles. So if you're someone that wants to get a unique look to your photos, you can quickly scroll through them and you'll notice that every color profile adds a little something special to your images. And it has a couple of like fun filters in it, like toy, watercolor, retro. It has all these interesting things. So if you're not someone that's super artsy, you don't want to take your photos into Lightroom and you just want to kind of get an interesting, cute look to your photos, that's a really good way to do it, and it saves you a ton of time. And now, one of my favorite features about this camera is the autofocus. I won't get too nerdy with it, but Sony has the best, and I mean the best autofocus in the camera industry. It is super fast and super reliable. So if you're someone that just wants to put this camera on auto and spray and pray, this camera will keep up with you. It's got really fast, really reliable autofocus. It will actually track your subjects for you as they move around. This camera is really smart. So when it comes to autofocus, honestly, not just 10 out of 10, it is a 20 out of 10. It's fast. You can even go into the camera and adjust your autofocus speed. This camera is phenomenal. When it comes to autofocus, it will not let you down. And that brings me to design. Apart from the flip screen, which is probably why most of you guys are looking at this body has quite a few limitations, but we'll do a section right after this that shows you cheap and affordable ways to get over those limitations. But the body does have a lot of limitations, so hold on to your hats. The actual body, not including the lens, is closer to that of like a compact camera, and this is my a6500 for comparison. As you can see, the a6500 is a lot bigger. Just you can see by the grip, the a6500 has a bigger grip, and it's also a much thicker camera, but because the lens is also so thick, it doesn't really make it that much easier to take around. I personally feel like Sony could have given me a bigger body and it would have just given me a better grip. They didn't need to make the body so small. However, because I anticipate a lot of you guys will be putting this camera on a selfie stick, this smaller body will make it much, much easier to balance on a selfie stick. So maybe that's why Sony did it. The body itself is super solid and it will not break down on you. This thing will last forever if you take care of it. And now let's get into the criticism. The first criticism that I have is that this does not have an eyepiece, which is kind of a bummer. I personally am the type of photographer that really likes to get in there, use my eyepiece, and really compose something. And being limited to this back LCD screen is not ideal. I feel like it just kind of removes me and takes me further from the camera. And maybe for some people that's not the biggest deal, but this back LCD screen is complete trash. The photos honestly will look better on your phone or your computer than they actually do on the camera. The LCD screen is very low quality and kind of makes sense. The camera is from 2014. And the other thing that kind of irks me about this camera is the lack of proper buttons. If you're someone that wants to get proper photos, there's normally a dial for aperture and shutter at the front and back, and that's completely not here. Really, this camera works best on auto. Otherwise, you have to kind of actually go into the menus to change your shutter and aperture, and that's just not ideal. It's super slow. If I'm gonna use the a5100, I'm gonna keep this thing on auto most of the time. I feel like this is an absolute casual camera, so if you are someone that wants to keep it on auto, you don't have to worry about this. And again, the criticism train just rolls on through. Another thing I don't like about this camera is that it has no external audio jack or a headphone jack. If you do want to vlog and do proper professional YouTube vlogging and you want to make a career out of it, you're going to need a camera with external audio, because while the internal audio in this camera is decent, if you're someone that's just shooting for yourself, this internal audio is like amazing for a compact camera. But if you're going to be doing proper YouTube vlogs, you're going to need external audio, and sadly this camera does not have it. But later in the video I'm going to show you how to fix that for cheap. And next, I'm excited to say something positive about this camera. One thing that normally a lot of people have issues with when it comes to Sony cameras is that the menus are really, really clunky. Personally, I'm like a mega nerd. I love clunky menus. I love getting deep into the settings. But because this is a casual camera, I really want to mention this. Sony has something called tile menus, which is what I like to lovingly refer to as the baby menu. If you hit the menu button, actually these cute little tiles come up that are actually far easier to navigate than the regular Sony menu. And if you do want to get into that, you simply go to setup, hit this, and there's a mode called tile menu, and that's how you do it. And if you set that up, it's way easier to navigate this menu, especially if you're a casual user. And a quick side note for any casual users out there, one really charming thing about this camera is if you hit the question mark button down here, an actual camera course pops up where it answers questions for you like adding effects, freezing subject motion, sky brightness, saturation, vivid greens, adding effects. So it really, like, if you have any questions and you're really new to photography or giving this camera to someone as their first camera, this is a really good camera to give because it's gonna actually teach the user how to use it properly. And finally, we're at the section of the video that's gonna show you how to overcome a couple of limitations with this camera. First thing, audio. So this thing does not have an external audio input, but that's okay. If you head over to Amazon, you can find something like this. It's called a Zune H1. I personally got mine for $110, but depending on where you live, it might be cheaper. This was $110. I put a $15 micro SD card in it, and now this thing gives me really, really solid audio. And you can kind of treat this thing like a shotgun mic. On the back of this is a tiny little hole. If you go to Home Depot or a hardware store near you, you can actually get a double-ended screw which will go into the bottom of your camera. It's a double-ended 3/4 screw. So you can kind of use that screw to put things on top of each other, do your flip screen, and voila, for $110, actually a little bit more, maybe let's say 150 bucks, you've now added a shotgun mic to your camera. And while it may be a bit clunky, you've solved your issue. This thing actually has a line in for an external mic. So like this, I'm wearing a lav mic right here. You can get this for about $20 to $30 on Amazon. Put the lav mic into this, keep this Zune recorder actually on you, and just talk to your camera regularly. And what you can do in post, you can get a really cheap program called Pluralize, or Adobe Premiere actually does it for free. I personally use DaVinci Resolve to edit nowadays, so I'm not quite sure. But all you would do is you would sync up the audio from your external recorder to your camera. That's a really easy way to overcome your limitation. And that's still cheaper than getting a a6100, which is generally about $1,100 to $1,300, depending on if there's a sale or not. It really depends on your budget, but if you can solve a problem for 110 bucks, why not? And another limitation that this camera has is that it doesn't have a remote trigger. So if it's ever far from you or if it's on a selfie stick, you can see yourself, but you can't make the camera take a photo. So what you can do is if you go onto your phone's app store, there's something called Sony Play Memories. When you download the app actually lets you remote trigger your camera. Because the camera has Wi-Fi built in, the camera connects straight to your phone and you can remote trigger it and even use the phone screen to see exactly what your camera's looking at to frame yourself up. It also allows you to take the photos straight from your camera to your phone. However, it's a pretty crappy experience. I just wouldn't bother. I would just take the SD card, put it in my computer. One thing that I am kind of sad about the camera industry is that no one's come up with a good way to transfer photos straight from the camera to your phone. Camera industry, make this happen. So who's this camera really for? It's for someone that wants a selfie screen, of course, and wants something nice and light, and is on a very, very, very strict budget. And the operative word here is very strict budget. Because, to be honest, the competition for this camera isn't that much more expensive, and it's a way better camera for the most part. You could get the a5100 that has the external audio, has a remote input, has way better low light for $600. For another $200, you could get the a6000, you could get the a6100, get the Canon G7X Mark II, which also has a selfie screen. To be honest, I really don't recommend buying this camera. I think it's a little too old, it's a little too outdated, and unless you're on a really strict budget where you're like, I do not have more than $450 to spend, if you live outside of the United States where you're like, man, those $200 are a lot more in my country, I would just seriously pass on this camera, except for one thing. Here's the thing, I always like to find the positive in everything. This camera has way better video than a GoPro, and it's super light. So if I had a project where it was really risky, where my camera would most likely break, or if I did a lot of stunt BMX or motorcycle stuff, where I might crash my motorcycle, I'd probably get this. For $450, this would be a great camera to put at the front of your motorcycle. It can get rained on, who cares? It's $450. If you crash your bike, who cares? Whatever. At least you didn't break your $2,000 a6500. If you're somebody that wants an action cam, this is going to give you way better video and photos than a GoPro, and if you break it, it's actually cheaper than a GoPro. And if you're a really casual shooter and you came across this camera because you were looking at compact cameras, most likely this is going to give you way better image quality than those compact cameras, and if those limitations that I mentioned don't mean anything to you, then definitely pick up this camera and save your money. Well guys, that wraps up a review on the Sony a5100. If you guys are interested in picking up this camera, there's a link in the description down below for the best pricing on this camera. And if you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave me a like. It really helps me figure out what kind of content you guys are liking and what kind of content I should be putting out in the future. If you have any questions about this camera still after this review, hit me up in the comments down below and I'll make sure to get back to every single one of you. As always, remember to like and subscribe. Until next time, guys.